The first thing I remember about Station Korath 9 is the sound of someone's bones breaking during morning formation. Not mine, not yet, but the wet snap echoed through the drill yard like a warning shot, and every recruit in that line understood the message. This was not a place that cared about you. This was a place that consumed you, and if you survived long enough, it called you a soldier. I should not have been there. I knew that. Everyone knew that. My name is Vili, and I am Solani, which in the language of military recruitment means I am small. I am soft-shelled, and I am a political gesture dressed in a uniform 2 sizes too large. The Solani Republic needed representation at the Galactic Joint Military Training Academy, and I was expendable enough to send. My government filed the paperwork, issued me standard-grade equipment that was already outdated, and told me to make them proud. They did not expect me to last a full rotation. The Academy operated on Station Korath 9, a massive orbital platform hanging in the dead space between 3 contested systems. It trained soldiers from dozens of species for joint operations, and its reputation was built on one simple principle. Those who graduated could survive anything. Those who did not graduate were not spoken of again. It was prestigious the way a scar is prestigious. It proved you had suffered something worth surviving. I arrived in the intake cycle with 46 other recruits. Gorvan heavy infantry candidates towered over everyone at nearly 3 meters tall, their dense bone plating catching the overhead lights like dull armor. Kithari reconnaissance specialists moved through the corridors in pairs, their reflective eyes tracking everything with the cold patience of born predators. Drael swarm tacticians clustered in groups of 4, their segmented bodies clicking in subsonic communication that made my inner ears itch. I stood among them like a pebble in a quarry. And then there was the human. She came through the docking gate alone, carrying a single kit bag over one shoulder. No entourage, no diplomatic escort, just a girl from Earth with close-cut dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been set more than once, and hands that were calloused in patterns I did not recognize. Her name was Mara Voss, and she was the only Class 12 Deathworld recruit in the entire cycle. I did not know what a Deathworld was, not truly. I had read the classification reports. Earth was a planet of extreme gravity, tectonic instability, atmospheric violence, and an evolutionary history so aggressive that the dominant species had achieved spaceflight, essentially by accident, while trying to build better ways to destroy each other. The galaxy classified such worlds by danger rating. Most habitable planets scored between Class 2 and Class 6. Earth scored a 12, and the committee that rated it reportedly argued it should have been higher. But reading about a death world and standing next to someone who survived one are very different things. Mara moved through the intake hall with a kind of efficiency that unsettled people. She was not aggressive. She was not loud. She simply moved like someone who had spent her entire life in an environment that would kill her if she stopped paying attention. Her eyes never stayed still. They swept every room she entered, cataloging exits, counting bodies, measuring distances. I watched her do it during orientation, and it took me a moment to realize she was not even conscious of the behavior. It was instinct. It was what Earth had built into her. I was sitting alone during the first meal break, trying to eat a nutrient ration that tasted like compressed dust, when she sat down across from me. No introduction, no formality. She just dropped her tray, looked at me, and said, "You look like you are about to pass out. Breathe. I have got you." I did not understand why she said that. I was not in danger. I was simply terrified, which to a human, apparently, looked like the same thing. "I am fine," I told her. "No, you are not," she said. "Your shell plates are pulled in tight and your breathing is shallow. On my planet, we call that a panic response. Different biology, same fear." She pushed a piece of her own ration bar across the table toward me. "Eat something, sugar helps." That was the beginning. Over the next several days, Mara Voss became my shadow. I did not ask for it. I did not understand it. But she positioned herself near me during every drill, every formation, every meal. When we ran the endurance track and my shorter legs fell behind, she matched my pace instead of pushing ahead with the faster recruits. When the barracks inspection officer noted that my bunk arrangement did not meet standard, Mara showed me the correct folding technique 3 times without a trace of impatience. When a Gorvan recruit shouldered me into a wall during corridor transit and kept walking, Mara stepped in front of him the next day and simply stood there until he went around. She never threatened anyone. She never raised her voice. She just occupied space with a certainty that made larger beings reconsider their choices. "Why do you help me?" I asked her one evening while we cleaned our equipment in the maintenance bay. "We are not the same species. We are not from the same system. You gain nothing from this." Mara looked at me with an expression I could not read. Humans have so many muscles in their faces that their emotions are almost impossible for other species to decode, but I was beginning to learn some of them. This one, I thought, was surprise. "You are serious," she said. "Yes. Billy, you are my friend. I do not need a reason beyond that." I did not know what to say. Among the Solani, alliances are transactional. You support those who can support you in return. Mara was the most capable recruit in our cycle, and I was the least. By any rational calculation, her investment in me was a loss. But humans, I was learning, did not operate on rational calculations. They operated on something deeper, something almost frightening in its intensity. Mara had decided I was her friend, and that decision carried a weight I did not yet comprehend. The days ground forward, training intensified. We learned weapons systems, tactical formations, emergency medical protocols, and close-quarters combat fundamentals. I struggled with nearly everything physical, and excelled at strategy and communication tasks. Mara excelled at everything, but she excelled at combat the way a blade excels at cutting. It was what she was designed for, even if she did not see it that way. The ComHFY recruits recognized it first. They were predators themselves, evolved from pack hunters on a high canopy world, and they could sense another predator's capability the way you could sense temperature. Within 2 weeks, they stopped sitting near Mara during meals. When she entered a room, the ComHFY would shift positions to keep her in their peripheral vision, the way prey animals track a threat without looking directly at it. Mara noticed. She said nothing. But it was Commander Thesic who concerned me most. Thesic was a Gorvon officer, senior rank, decorated across 4 campaigns. He ran our training cohort with the philosophy that weakness was a disease, and his job was the cure. He was enormous even by Gorvon standards, with bone plating so thick it had begun to calcify around his shoulder joints, giving him a permanent armored hunch. His voice carried the deep vibration of Gorvon command authority, a subsonic frequency that triggered submission instincts in most species. He took an immediate dislike to me. I was everything he despised. Small, fragile, political. He called me the decoration during our first week, loud enough for the entire formation to hear. He assigned me the heaviest equipment during marches. He scheduled my evaluations during the most difficult rotation windows. He made certain I knew, every single day, that he believed I did not belong. I could endure that. The Solani are not warriors, but we are patient, and I had been warned before I arrived that the Academy would test me in ways my body was not built for. I could endure insults. I could endure exhaustion. I could endure the quiet humiliation of being the worst performer in every physical category. What I could not endure, and what I did not anticipate, was that Commander Thesic was not simply harsh. He was deliberate. He was not trying to toughen me. He was trying to break me so completely that my failure would justify his belief that species like mine had no place in military service. He was building a case, one bruise at a time. There were patterns. He would assign me to obstacle courses immediately after I had completed endurance drills, giving me no recovery window. He would schedule my evaluations during the high-gravity rotation periods, when the station's generators were calibrated for Gorvon standard training, nearly twice the gravity my body was built to handle. He would stand over me when I failed, not shouting, just watching, making sure every other recruit saw the Solani crumple. It was systematic, it was patient, and it was invisible to anyone who did not look carefully enough to see the design beneath the discipline. Mara saw it before I did. She started keeping a record on her datapad, noting every biased assignment, every skipped safety protocol, every instance where Thesic's treatment of me crossed the line from difficult training into targeted cruelty. She filed a formal complaint through the Academy's internal oversight system at the end of the 3rd week. The complaint was acknowledged, reviewed, and dismissed within 48 hours. Insufficient evidence. Training falls within the commander's discretion. Mara filed a second complaint with additional documentation. This one was returned with a disciplinary note attached to her own file. The note read, Recruit Voss is reminded that persistent challenges to command authority constitute insubordination and may result in formal action. I watched her read that note. Her face did not change. Her breathing did not change. But something behind her eyes shifted, like a door closing quietly in a distant room, and the ComHFY recruit standing 3 meters away took 2 steps back without appearing to know why. "Mara," I said, "please, it is not worth the trouble. I can manage." She looked at me, and for just a moment she smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile. It was the kind that had nothing to do with happiness. "You should not have to manage," she said. "That is the whole point." I did not understand then. I did not understand that when a human says something like that, quiet and certain, they are not making an observation, they are making a decision. And a human's decision, once made, is not a thought, it is a direction, it is a force. It is the thing that their entire violent, beautiful, terrifying evolutionary history has been building toward. I did not understand that the most dangerous thing on Station Korath 9 was not the Gorvan commander with his crushing authority and his armored fists. It was the quiet girl from Earth who had decided that I mattered. I should have understood. The ComHFY did. I saw them step back from her that evening, and I should have known why. I need to tell you about Crucible Week, because that is when everything shattered. Every training cycle at the Academy included a 7-day evaluation period called the Crucible, a gauntlet of escalating tests designed to push recruits past their physical and mental limits. Performance during the Crucible determined advancement, specialization assignments, and in some cases, whether you remained at the Academy at all. It was the filter that separated those who could serve from those who could not. And Commander Thesic had designed this particular crucible himself. The first 4 days were brutal, but survivable. Endurance marches in full gear through corridors, where the station's gravity generators had been increased to 1.4 standard. Navigation exercises in blacked-out sections with disabled comm systems. Tactical simulations where the scenario parameters changed mid-exercise without warning. I struggled, as I always did, but I kept pace. Mara stayed close, and on the rare occasions when the rules allowed partnered work, she compensated for my physical limitations with the kind of effortless precision that made the instructors stop writing on their evaluation tablets and simply watch. But Thesic was tightening the pressure. My equipment assignments were getting heavier. My rest rotations were getting shorter. During the Day 3 navigation exercise, I was assigned a solo route through a section of the station that the maintenance logs showed had intermittent atmospheric regulation failures. When I reported this to the supervising instructor, he checked with Thesic, then told me the route was safe and within standard parameters. I completed it. I nearly collapsed from oxygen deprivation in the final corridor, but I completed it. Mara was waiting at the exit point. She did not say anything. She just took my pack off my shoulders and handed me a water canister, and her hands were shaking, which was the first time I had ever seen a human's hands shake from something other than cold. "I filed another report," she said. "Mara, they will discipline you. Let them." On the morning of Day 5, the entire cohort assembled in the combat evaluation hall. The room was enormous, a circular arena with reinforced flooring and impact-dampening walls, surrounded by an observation gallery where instructors and evaluators sat with their recording equipment and scoring tablets. The air smelled like disinfectant and old sweat. The Day 5 evaluation was close-quarters combat. Controlled sparring. The rules were displayed on the hall's main screen in 12 languages, and they were simple. Matches would be conducted in assigned pairs. Contact was full, but no lethal force was permitted. Species-specific biological vulnerabilities were off-limits, meaning you could not target a ComHFY's exposed throat membrane, a Drael's segmented joint gaps, or a Solani's thorax plates. The referee, a senior ComHFY instructor named Voran, would stop each match at the first clear submission signal. The pairings were posted. I scrolled through the list with a growing sense of unease. Gorvan against Gorvan, ComHFY against ComHFY, Drael against Drael. Species matched against species, size class against size class. It was the standard protocol, designed to test combat ability without creating mismatches that could result in serious injury. And then I saw my name. Vili, Solani. Paired against Dravok, Gorvan. I read it 3 times. Dravok was Commander Thesic's personal protege. a recruit who had scored in the top 5% of every physical evaluation since day one. He was nearly 3 meters tall. He weighed approximately 4 times my body mass. His bone plating was so dense that standard sidearm rounds would not penetrate it at close range. And he had been paired against me, a soft-shelled Solani with no natural armor and pain receptors distributed across my entire thorax. I looked across the hall and found Thesic standing near the evaluator's platform. He was watching me. He was not smiling, but there was something in his posture, a looseness, a satisfaction, that told me everything I needed to know. This was not an error. This was his design. Mara saw the pairing list 30 seconds after I did. She crossed the hall in 4 strides and stood before the assignment board, reading it once, then turning to find Thesic. I saw her jaw tighten. I saw the tendons in her neck pull taut. And then she did something I did not expect. She walked to the referee's station, calm and composed, and formally requested a substitution. Recruit Voss requests to take Recruit Vili's assigned match against Recruit Dravok, she said. Her voice was level, professional, perfectly within protocol. Referee Voron looked up from his tablet. He glanced at Thesic, then back at Mara. Request denied, he said. Commander's discretion. Pairings are final. The pairing violates Academy Regulation 14-7, which prohibits combat evaluation matches between species with a mass differential greater than 200% without medical clearance, Mara said. She had the regulation number memorized. She had been waiting for this. Voron hesitated. He checked his tablet. I could see the uncertainty on his face, but then Thesic stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the referee's station. The regulation permits exceptions when authorized by the supervising commander, Thesic said. His voice was smooth, controlled. I have authorized this pairing. The Solani recruit must demonstrate combat readiness against all potential battlefield opponents, not merely those that match her size. This is a training environment, not a comfort zone. Mara did not move. She did not raise her voice. She said, Recruit Vili weighs 41 kilograms. Recruit Dravok weighs 173 kilograms. This match will result in injury. Then perhaps the Solani Republic should reconsider sending recruits who cannot withstand the standards of this academy, Thesic said. The hall went quiet. Every recruit in that room understood what was happening. This was not a training decision. This was punishment. Thesic was using Dravok as a weapon, and the referees were looking at their tablets and saying nothing. Mara looked at me. I saw something in her face that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was not anger. It was something beyond anger, something that burned quieter and hotter, like a star collapsing into itself before it detonates. She held my gaze for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, I understood that she was making a calculation that had nothing to do with regulations or protocols or any system that the galaxy had built. But the match was called, and I stepped into the ring. Dravok stood across from me, rolling his massive shoulders. He did not look enthusiastic about the pairing, but he did not look troubled by it either. He was a soldier following orders, and his orders came from Thesic. He would do what was expected of him. Referee Voron signaled the start. Dravok advanced. I will not describe what followed in detail, because I cannot remember most of it clearly. Pain has a way of erasing memory, replacing precise recollection with sensation and fragments. What I remember is this. Dravok's first strike hit my left side and drove the air from my body. My legs gave out, but I did not fall, because his second strike caught me across the chest and held me upright through sheer impact. I felt something crack inside my thorax, a deep, wet sound that resonated through my skeleton. My vision blurred. I raised my upper limbs in the submission signal, the universal gesture that every recruit at the academy was trained to recognize from their first day. Dravok paused. He looked toward the referee. Voron looked toward Thesic. Thesic stood with his arms crossed, his weight settled back on his heels, and he did not signal. The match continued. Dravok hit me again, lower this time, targeting my central thorax where the shell plates are thinnest. I heard the crack this time, sharp and distinct, and the pain was so immediate and so total that my entire body seized. My secondary air sac ruptured, collapsing inward and sending a cascade of pressure through my respiratory system that made every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. I submitted again, both upper limbs raised. The signal was clear. Every species in that room recognized it. Thesic did not signal. Dravok hit me once more. My thorax plates buckled inward. Nerve clusters that ran along my lower body fired in patterns that my brain could not process, sending waves of burning numbness down through my limbs until I could not feel my legs at all. I hit the floor. I could not move. I could not breathe properly. My vision was narrowing to a single bright point, and through that shrinking tunnel, I saw the observation gallery, the faces of 45 recruits watching, and among them, Mara. She was on her feet. 2 instructors had moved to either side of her, their hands on her arms. She was not struggling. She was perfectly still, her eyes locked on Thesic, and her mouth was open, and she was making a sound. I have heard many things in my life: the subsonic rumble of Gorvan command voices, the high-frequency hunting calls of Kithari packs, the harmonic clicking of Drael swarm communication. But the sound Mara Voss made in that moment was something I had never heard from any species on any world. It was not a scream, it was not a word. It was a raw, tearing vocalization that came from somewhere inside her that no civilized species should have needed to access. A sound that belonged to a time before language, before thought, before anything except the desperate, furious need to protect. The Kithari instructors flinched. One of them released Mara's arm involuntarily. She lunged forward 2 steps before the second instructor caught her, and it took both of them, 2 trained Kithari handlers, to hold a single human female in place. Thesic finally signaled the end of the match. The hall was silent. Not the natural silence of a room between sounds, but the heavy, pressurized silence that comes when dozens of beings simultaneously realize they have witnessed something they cannot undo. I saw it in the faces of the recruits in the gallery. The Drael had stopped their subsonic clicking entirely, their segmented bodies rigid with a stillness that their species only displays during extreme threat assessment. 2 Gorvan recruits near the back of the gallery had turned away. Even they, with their bone-plated bodies and their culture of physical dominance, recognized that what had just happened in that ring was not training. It was a demonstration. And the lesson it taught had nothing to do with combat readiness. I was on the floor. I could not feel anything below my central thorax. My vision was fading, but I heard Voron's voice calling for medical, and I heard the hiss of the stretcher platform deploying from the wall, and I felt someone take my hand, my small, broken manipulator arm, and hold it with a gentleness that was so at odds with the violence of the last 2 minutes that I almost believed I was hallucinating. It was Mara. She had broken free from the instructors, or they had let her go. She walked beside the stretcher as they carried me to the medical bay, and she held my hand the entire way. The corridors were long and bright, and I remember the ceiling lights passing overhead in a steady rhythm, each one a pulse of white, that marked another meter of distance between me and the place where I had been broken. Other recruits stepped aside as the stretcher passed. Some of them looked at me with pity. Some looked at me with something worse than pity, the quiet relief that comes when someone else absorbs the blow you feared for yourself. Mara did not look at any of them. She looked straight ahead and held my hand and did not speak. Her silence was heavier than any words I had ever heard, in any language, from any world. The medical bay was cold and smelled like chemical sterilizers. The physician, a Drael specialist named Tovis, ran her scanning instruments over my body, with the rapid efficiency of someone who had seen many training injuries, but did not often see ones this severe. She spoke in quick, clipped phrases to her assistant while I lay on the table, staring at the ceiling and trying to remember how to breathe without my secondary air sac. 3 cracked thorax plates, 1 ruptured air sac. Nerve damage along the lower thoracic bundle, affecting motor function in both legs. Tovis said the plates would heal. She said the air sac could be surgically repaired, but the nerve damage was uncertain. It might heal fully, it might not. There was a significant probability that I would never regain complete function in my lower limbs. I would be discharged from the academy, sent home. A failure, just as Thesic had intended from the beginning. My government would issue a quiet statement about unforeseen circumstances. My name would be removed from the active roster, and somewhere in the Academy's records, a note would be filed indicating that the Solani recruit had been unable to meet the physical demands of the program, and the implication would be clear. Not that I had been targeted. Not that I had been deliberately placed in a situation designed to produce exactly this outcome, just that I was not strong enough, that my species was not built for this. Thesic would have his proof, and nobody would question it, because the system had already decided that questions were not welcome. Mara stood beside my bed through the entire examination. She did not interrupt the physician. She did not ask questions. She simply stood there, her hand on the bed rail, her knuckles turning white from the pressure of her grip. I could see a vein pulsing in her temple, a small, rhythmic movement that I had learned to associate with humans suppressing intense emotion. Everything about her was contained, compressed, like energy being forced into a space too small to hold it. When Tovis left to prepare the surgical suite, Mara leaned down and said one sentence. "I will fix this." Her voice was quiet, flat, the kind of calm that is not calm at all, but something far more dangerous, wearing calm's face. "What do you mean?" I asked. She did not answer. She squeezed my arm once, gently, the way she had done 100 times before. Then she straightened up and walked toward the door. "Mara," I called after her. She did not turn around. I lay there in the cold light of the medical bay, listening to her footsteps fade down the corridor, and for the first time since meeting her, I was afraid. Not of what the galaxy would do to Mara Voss. The galaxy had already done its worst to her species, and they had climbed out of it with fire in their hands and stars in their reach. I was afraid of what Mara Voss would do to the galaxy. 12 hours is a long time when you are lying in a medical bed with cracked bones and a body that will not respond to your commands. 12 hours is long enough to replay every moment of the match, every impact, every crack, until the memory becomes less a recording and more a bruise that you press against over and over, because you cannot stop yourself. 12 hours is long enough to wonder if your friend has done something that cannot be undone. The medical bay on Station ComHFY 9 was designed for efficiency, not comfort. 8 beds arranged in 2 rows, separated by thin curtains that provided the illusion of privacy without any of its substance. Monitoring equipment lined the walls, clicking and humming with the rhythmic indifference of machines that do not care who they are measuring, only that the measurements continue. The overhead lights were set to a permanent half-brightness that was supposed to promote healing, but instead created a gray, shadowless environment where time lost all meaning. I could not move my legs. The nerve damage had settled into a deep, buzzing numbness that was somehow worse than pain, because pain at least confirmed that the nerves were still functioning. This was absence. This was my body simply stopping at a certain point and becoming something that belonged to someone else. Physician Tovis had completed the emergency repair on my ruptured air sac and stabilized my cracked thorax plates with biocomposite patches. She told me the immediate danger had passed. She told me to rest. She did not tell me whether I would walk normally again, and I did not ask, because I was not ready to hear the answer. What I was ready for, what I was desperate for, was information about Mara. She had left the medical bay 12 hours ago with a sentence and a silence, and since then, nothing. No visit. No message through the station's internal communication system. No word from anyone about where she was or what she was doing. The absence of information was its own kind of injury, and it was one I could not treat by lying still and waiting. The first fragment came from a nurse, a young Solani named Prel, who was assigned to the night rotation. She came to check my vitals 4 hours after Mara left, and her movements were quicker than usual, her attention divided between her instruments and the door. "Has something happened?" I asked. Prel adjusted a sensor on my monitor. "I am not supposed to discuss operational matters with patients." "Prel, please." She hesitated. Then, quietly, "Your human filed a formal brutality report with the Academy Oversight Office. Full documentation, medical scans, match recording, the denied substitution request, everything." A brutality report, that was different from the complaints Mara had filed before. A brutality report triggered a mandatory investigation. It went above Thesic's authority, directly to the station's oversight officer, a position specifically designed to be independent of the training command structure. "What happened?" I asked. The oversight officer reviewed the report. Prel paused. Her hands stopped moving on the instruments. He forwarded it to Commander Thesic for internal resolution. I stared at her. "He sent it back to Thesic?" "Standard procedure," Prel said, but her voice carried the particular flatness that Solani use when they are saying words they do not believe. The oversight officer determined that the matter fell within the training commander's operational authority and recommended internal review. I understood. I understood completely. The system had been shown evidence of deliberate harm, targeted cruelty, a commander using his position to injure a recruit who had no ability to defend herself, and the system had handed that evidence back to the person who caused the harm and asked him to review it himself. The system was not broken. The system was working exactly as it was designed to work. It protected its own. "Where is Mara now?" I asked. Prell shook her head. "I do not know. She was seen leaving the oversight office approximately 6 hours ago. After that, I have not heard anything." 6 hours. 6 hours of silence from a human who had been systematically denied every legitimate avenue of recourse. 6 hours from a Deathworld organism that had just watched the only system capable of addressing her grievance fold itself up and hand the weapon back to the attacker. I tried to sit up. Pain lanced through my thorax, and the numbness in my legs reminded me that sitting up was an ambition, not a possibility. I fell back against the bed, breathing hard, and Prell pressed a sedative dose into my IV line without asking. "Rest," she said. "I will tell you if I hear anything." I did not rest. I lay in the dim light, and I thought about Mara Voss, and I tried to calculate what a human being does when every system, every authority, every rule and regulation and chain of command has failed, and the person they care about is lying in a hospital bed with damage that might be permanent. I knew the answer. I had read the history files. When humans run out of civilized options, they do not surrender. They do not accept. They reach back through 10,000 years of evolutionary memory to a time when they were small, soft-skinned primates on a world that was actively trying to kill them every single day, and they remember the one skill that kept them alive when everything else failed. They become the most dangerous thing in the room. The second fragment came from Soril, the Kithari recruit who bunked 3 rows from Mara in the barracks. Soril came to the medical bay during the 8th hour, ostensibly to check on me, but really, I think, because she needed to tell someone what she had seen, and I was the only person who would understand why it mattered. Soril's reflective eyes were wide when she sat beside my bed. Kithari do not show fear easily. Their predator heritage gives them an emotional baseline that most species interpret as permanent composure, but Soril was disturbed, and she did not try to hide it. "Your human came back to the barracks 3 hours ago," she said. "What did she do?" She changed into her combat fatigues. She accessed her locker and retrieved her datapad. She sat on her bunk and studied the station schematics for approximately 40 minutes. Then she did something I have never seen a recruit do. "What?" She removed her tracking beacon. I felt a cold wave move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the medical bay. Every recruit at the academy wore a subcutaneous tracking beacon implanted during intake processing. It monitored location, vital signs, and proximity to restricted areas. Removing it was not merely against regulations. Removing it was a court-martial offense. It was the kind of action that ended careers, that resulted in imprisonment, that told the entire military hierarchy that you had moved beyond the boundaries of acceptable behavior and were operating on your own authority. Mara had removed hers. "How?" I asked. The beacons were implanted beneath the skin of the forearm, anchored to the tissue with biocompatible adhesive. Removing one required medical instruments, a steady hand, and a tolerance for pain that most species could not sustain without anesthetic. Soril's expression tightened. She used a field knife and a pair of forceps from the barracks first aid kit. She sterilized the blade with the heating element from her canteen. The entire extraction took her less than 2 minutes. She did not make a sound. I stared at Soril. 2 minutes. No anesthetic. No sound. A human cutting into her own arm with a field knife, extracting a device anchored to her tissue, and doing it silently enough that the recruits in adjacent bunks did not realize what was happening until they saw the blood on the first aid kit. That was the moment I understood something fundamental about the species from Earth. Their capacity for enduring pain was not a limitation they fought against, it was a resource they deployed. When a human decides that something must be done, and pain stands between them and the doing of it, they do not find a way around the pain. They go through it, and they keep going, and they do not stop until the task is complete or they are physically unable to continue. And even then, their bodies have mechanisms, adrenaline cascades, endorphin releases, psychological compartmentalization that allow them to continue well past the point where most species would shut down. "I tried to stop her," Soril continued. I told her she would be expelled. I told her the consequences. What did she say? Sorrel's voice dropped. She looked at me, and she said, "I am not going to hurt anyone who does not deserve it." And then she walked out. And you let her go. Sorrel's eyes shifted. Villy, I have hunted in the deep canopy of my homeworld. I have tracked and killed prey that outweighed me by a factor of 10. I know what a predator looks like when it has committed to the chase. She paused. I was not going to stand in front of that. I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, I could see Mara moving through the station corridors, trackless, unmonitored, carrying nothing but her training and a decision that had crystallized into something harder than Gorvan bone plating. I could see her studying the schematics, memorizing security rotation patterns, identifying the gaps and blind spots that every system has, if you look long enough and carefully enough. I understood what she was doing, and I could not stop her. The third fragment came from the station's internal communication system, which began broadcasting emergency alerts during the 11th hour. The first alert was a security notification, a Level 2 breach in the upper ring, restricted zone. Someone had accessed a secured corridor without authorization. The second alert, 9 minutes later, was a medical emergency call. Commander's quarters, upper ring, room 14C. Trauma team requested. Priority immediate. Prell sealed the medical bay doors. She was following protocol, locking down non-essential areas during a security event, but her hands were shaking as she entered the access codes. I lay in my bed and listened to the alerts cycle through the overhead speakers. Security breach. Medical emergency. Security teams to the upper ring. Medical teams to the upper ring. The station's automated voice repeated the information with the detached precision of a system that processed emergencies as data points, not as events that changed the shape of everything around them. 12 minutes after the medical alert, the security notifications stopped. The overhead speakers went quiet. The medical bay was silent, except for the clicking of the monitors and the sound of my own breathing. Then footsteps in the corridor outside, not running, walking, steady, measured, and deliberate. The footsteps of someone who was not fleeing from something, but moving toward something. Prell looked at me from across the bay. Her expression was one I could not read, because it was not an expression I had ever seen on a Solani face before. It was somewhere between awe and terror, and it lived in the narrow space between those two things, where understanding collapses and instinct takes over. "You're human," she said quietly. "She is coming here." The footsteps stopped outside the medical bay door. There was a pause, then the door's access panel chimed, and the lock disengaged, and the door opened. Mara Voss walked in. She was still wearing her combat fatigues. The fabric was dark, standard Academy issue, designed to resist staining. But even that fabric could not hide what covered her. It was wet and thick, and a deep, vivid violet, the color of Gorvan blood, and there was so much of it that her uniform glistened under the medical bay's gray lights. None of it was hers. In her right hand, she held something. It was large and heavy, and it hung from her grip with the limp weight of something that was no longer connected to the living system that had powered it. It was gray-plated and massive, and it ended at one end in thick, blunt fingers, and at the other end in a ragged separation point, where bone and tissue and connective fiber had been torn apart by a force that exceeded the structural tolerance of Gorvan anatomy. It was Commander Thesik's arm, the right arm, the arm he had crossed over his chest while he watched Dravuk break my thorax plates, the arm he had used to signal that the match should continue when I submitted, the arm that represented his authority, his command, his power over every recruit in his cohort. Mara carried it across the medical bay and laid it on the floor in front of my bed, not thrown, not dropped, laid down, with a deliberateness that made the gesture feel less like violence and more like testimony, like evidence presented before a court that did not yet exist but would. She looked at me. Her breathing was controlled. Steady. The monitors on the wall behind her, the ones that measured ambient biosins of anyone within range, showed her heart rate at only slightly above her normal resting baseline. She was not agitated. She was not in a frenzy. She was calm, in the way that deep water is calm, where the surface is still, but the current underneath can pull down anything that enters. "He used this arm to signal that the match should continue," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "He will not signal anything again." I opened my mouth. No sound came out. I stared at her, at the violet stains on her uniform, at the evidence of what she had done lying on the floor between us like an offering, or a promise, or both. Mara sat down in the chair beside my bed. She looked at my IV line, then at the monitors tracking my vitals, then at the biocomposite patches on my thorax. She reached out and adjusted my blanket, where it had bunched near my shoulder. "Is your pain medication working?" she asked. "You look uncomfortable." She asked it the same way she had asked me to eat a ration bar on our first day. The same tone, the same attention, as if the last 12 hours had been an errand she needed to complete before returning to the thing that actually mattered, which was making sure I was all right. 6 armed security officers arrived 4 minutes later. They came through the medical bay door in tactical formation, weapons drawn, the formation pattern they used for high-threat containment scenarios. They pointed their weapons at Mara, and she did not flinch. She raised her hands, still stained violet to the wrists, and she spoke before any of them could. "Commander Thesic is alive," she said. "I made sure of it. He will need a trauma team. Upper deck, room 14C. I suggest you hurry." They cuffed her. She did not resist. She stood up from the chair beside my bed, extended her wrists, and let them bind her, as if the restraints were an inconvenience rather than a consequence. But before they let her out, she turned back to me. "Nobody gets to hurt you," she said. "That is not a feeling, that is a fact." They took her through the door. I heard her footsteps receding down the corridor, flanked by the heavier steps of the security escorts, and the sound faded, and the medical bay was silent again. Prell was pressed against the far wall. She had not moved since Mara entered. She was staring at the arm on the floor. Nobody wanted to touch it. I lay in my bed, and I breathed, and I looked at the ceiling, and I tried to understand what had just happened. But understanding requires a framework, a set of assumptions about how the galaxy works, and what is possible within it. And my framework had just been dismantled by a girl from a Deathworld who had walked into a decorated commander's quarters and walked out carrying a piece of him because the system that was supposed to protect me had refused to do its job. I learned something that night about the species from Earth. They do not protect you because it is logical. They do not protect you because it is strategic. They do not weigh the costs and benefits and make a calculated decision about whether intervention serves their interests. They protect you because once a human decides you are theirs, and that decision activates something inside them that the galaxy has no classification for, no regulation covering, no defense against. It is not rage. Rage burns out. It is not instinct. Instinct is blind. It is something else, something that sits at the intersection of love and violence and absolute unshakable certainty. And when it wakes up, it does not stop until the thing that threatened you has been removed from the equation, with a thoroughness that makes the rest of the galaxy sit down and reconsider every assumption it has ever made about soft-skinned bipeds from a Class 12 rock. The galaxy has no idea what that means, but it was beginning to learn. I saw the security footage 9 days later, during the pre-tribunal review process, when Mara's assigned defense counsel played it for me in a sealed conference room and asked me to confirm what I saw. I did not want to watch it. I did not want to know the details, because the details would make it real, in a way that the arm on the floor and the violet blood on Mara's uniform had not quite achieved. But the defense needed my testimony, and I owed Mara everything, so I sat in my mobility chair and watched. The conference room was small and windowless, with a single display screen mounted on the wall and 2 chairs positioned in front of it. Lieutenant Dunning sat beside me, her datapad open on her lap, recording my reactions and noting timestamps that she planned to reference during the tribunal. She had reviewed the footage 17 times already, she told me. She knew every second of it, but she needed me to see it once, because the tribunal would ask me what I knew, and she needed my knowledge to be complete. "If you need to stop at any point," she said, "tell me, and we will pause." I told her I would not need to stop. I was wrong about that, but I did not know it yet. Before the footage from Thesic's quarters, Dunning showed me the reconstructed timeline of Mara's movements through the station. Security had pieced it together from corridor cameras, access logs, and witness statements after the fact, since Mara had removed her tracking beacon and most of the station's monitoring was keyed to beacon signals rather than visual identification. She had left the barracks at approximately 22:15 station time. She moved through the mid-ring corridors using maintenance access routes that were technically open to all personnel, but rarely traveled during night cycles. She had memorized these routes during weeks of observation, walking them casually during off-duty hours, noting camera positions, recording security patrol schedules, and identifying the 3-minute gaps between rotation changes when certain corridors were unmonitored. At 23:12, she reached the upper ring, the restricted zone, where senior officers maintained their private quarters. 2 security doors separated the upper ring from the general access areas. The first was a standard biometric lock. Mara bypassed it using an access code that she had obtained, the investigation later revealed, by watching a maintenance technician enter it from across a corridor during the second week of training. She had memorized a 9-digit code from a distance of 12 meters in a single observation. Human visual acuity and pattern retention, the investigation report noted, significantly exceeded the assumptions built into the station's security design. The second door was a proximity sensor tied to the tracking beacon system. It was designed to reject anyone whose beacon was not registered for upper ring access. Mara bypassed it by physically removing the sensor module from the wall panel. She used her bare hands. The module was secured with industrial fasteners, rated for long-term installation. She pulled it free in under 30 seconds, the mounting brackets bending outward as she wrenched the housing away from the wall. The damage was documented in the security report, with photographs that showed the deformed metal, and a structural engineer noted that the force required to achieve that deformation exceeded what their models predicted for a human of Mara's body mass. Humans, the report concluded, were significantly stronger than their size suggested. The investigation team added a footnote recommending that all Deathworld species recruits be factored into future security assessments. It was, I thought when I read it later, the kind of recommendation that should have been obvious from the beginning. At 23:41, Mara reached the corridor outside Thesic's quarters. She stood there for 6 minutes. The corridor camera captured her standing motionless, facing his door, her breathing slow and even. She was not hesitating. She was centering herself. I recognized the behavior from our training sessions, the quiet moment before a human commits to a physical action, when their body chemistry shifts, and their focus narrows, and everything that is not the task ahead falls away. At 23:47, she opened the door and went inside. The footage was from Thesic's personal security system, a camera mounted above the entry door of his private quarters in the upper ring. The image quality was sharp. The timestamp confirmed the entry. The door opened. Mara stepped inside. Thesic was seated at his dining table, eating his evening meal, a platter of dense protein slabs that Gorvan preferred during rest cycles. He looked up. His expression moved from surprise to anger in approximately 1 second. "What are you doing here, recruit?" he said. His voice carried the subsonic command frequency that was supposed to trigger submission in most species. Mara did not submit. She stood just inside the door, her feet set shoulder-width apart. Her weight balanced forward slightly on the balls of her feet. A fighting stance, but subtle enough that someone unfamiliar with human combat positioning might not recognize it. "I am here because of what you did to Vili," she said. Thesic stood up from the table. He was enormous. Even on the screen, the size disparity was staggering. Thesic was nearly 3 meters tall and weighed close to 200 kilograms. Mara was maybe 170 centimeters and perhaps 65 kilograms. He outmassed her by a factor of 3. His bone plating was natural armor. His species had evolved for physical dominance on a heavy gravity world. By any reasonable analysis, he should have been the threat in that room. "You broke into my quarters," Thesic said. "You removed your tracking beacon. You have committed offenses that will end your career and likely result in your imprisonment. And for what? For a Solani runt who has no business wearing a uniform?" Mara did not respond to the question. Instead, she said something that the defense counsel replayed twice during the tribunal, because it changed the legal framing of everything that followed. "I have exhausted every legal channel available to me. I filed 2 complaints and a formal brutality report. All 3 were dismissed or redirected. The system designed to protect recruits from abusive command authority has failed. I am informing you of this failure before I act." She was giving him notice. She was standing in the room of a Gorvan officer 3 times her size, and she was formally notifying him that the rules no longer applied, not because she had abandoned them, but because every institution responsible for enforcing them had abandoned her first. Thesic laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated the camera slightly. "You think you can threaten me? You are a human. You are nothing but endurance and stubbornness packed into a fragile shell. Your species is a novelty. You do not frighten me. I am not trying to frighten you, Mara said. I am trying to be fair. Thesic charged. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his right arm swinging in a wide arc that would have crushed a Solani's entire skeletal structure on impact. It was the standard Gorvan close-quarters opening, a devastating first strike designed to end confrontations before they began. Mara was not there when the arm arrived. She had moved, not backward but laterally, sidestepping the swing with a precision that spoke of hours spent studying Gorvan combat footage. She knew his patterns. She had analyzed his species' fighting mechanics, the way she analyzed everything, with the obsessive, methodical thoroughness of a Deathworld predator that survives not through strength, but through preparation. Thesic swung again, and again. Each strike was powerful enough to dent the reinforced wall plating of his quarters, and each strike found empty air where Mara had been a fraction of a second before. She was not dodging randomly. She was moving with purpose, guiding Thesic's momentum into patterns that exhausted his energy while preserving hers, drawing him off balance, letting his own mass work against him. The Gorvan are powerful, but they are not fast. Their bone plating adds weight that slows their movements. Their fighting style relies on overwhelming force delivered in short bursts, and when that force fails to connect, they tire quickly. Thesic was breathing hard within 40 seconds. His swings were getting wider, sloppier. He was burning through his reserves trying to hit something that moved like water. Mara struck for the first time at the 50-second mark. She moved inside his guard during a wide swing, planted her feet, and drove her elbow into the gap between his chest plating and his right shoulder joint. It was a precise, targeted blow, aimed at the one structural weakness in Gorvan upper body armor, the point where the shoulder's bone plate meets the softer connective tissue of the joint capsule. Thesic bellowed. He staggered. His right arm dropped, the joint partially disabled by the impact. Mara did not retreat. She stepped closer, inside his reach, where his size became a disadvantage rather than an asset, and she applied a lock to his damaged shoulder joint that the Defense Council later identified as a modified human grappling technique adapted specifically for Gorvan anatomy. She had studied this. She had prepared for this. Every moment she had spent watching Thesic, analyzing his movements, memorizing his patterns during training sessions, had been building toward this single application. She knew his body better than he did, because she had approached it as a problem to solve, and humans, when they commit to solving a problem, do not stop until the problem is solved. The lock hyperextended Thesic's shoulder beyond its range of motion. The joint began to separate. Thesic screamed, a sound that shook the camera and distorted the audio. He swung his left arm at Mara, connecting with her side. The impact was severe. I saw her body absorb the blow, her ribs flexing inward, and a human physician later confirmed that the strike cracked 2 of her ribs. But she did not release the lock. Humans can sustain injuries that would incapacitate most species and continue functioning. Their pain management systems include massive adrenaline release, endorphin flooding, and a psychological mechanism that the medical literature calls combat focus, in which the conscious mind suppresses pain signals in favor of task completion. Mara's ribs were broken, and she did not let go. She completed the technique in 90 seconds. The shoulder joint failed, and then, with Thesic on the floor, she reached for the ceremonial blade mounted on his wall, a traditional Gorvan officer's weapon that he kept displayed as a symbol of rank, and she completed the separation. I will not describe that part in detail. The footage exists in the tribunal record for anyone who needs to see it. What I will say is that Mara performed the action with the focused efficiency of someone completing a necessary task, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, but with the grim, unflinching competence of a surgeon removing a damaged component from a system that needed to be repaired. She used Thesic's own blade. She targeted the same arm that had signaled the continuation of my match, and when it was done, she applied a field tourniquet from the emergency kit mounted by his door, a detail that the defense emphasized repeatedly at trial to ensure that Thesic would not bleed out before the medical team arrived. She made sure he lived. She was deliberate about that. She did not want him dead. She wanted him diminished. She wanted him to spend the rest of his career looking at the space where his authority used to be and remembering why it was gone. That was what Mara Voss did when the galaxy's systems failed her friend. She did not give up. She did not accept. She did not collapse into despair or helplessness. She studied the problem, prepared the solution, informed the target, and executed the plan with a precision that left the entire station's security apparatus struggling to understand how a single recruit had bypassed their systems and dismantled a decorated commander in under 2 minutes. The defense counsel turned off the footage and looked at me. She was a human officer named Lieutenant Claire Dunning, and she had arrived from Earth's embassy within 48 hours of Mara's arrest, accompanied by 2 additional legal advisors and a diplomatic attaché who spoke very quietly and carried credentials that made station security officers stand straighter when he entered a room. The room was quiet. The screen was dark. I realized I was gripping the armrests of my mobility chair hard enough that my manipulator arms were aching, and I forced myself to let go. "I understand if you need a moment," Dunning said. "I do not need a moment," I said, though that was not entirely true. "I need to know what happens next." Dunning closed her datapad and folded her hands. "The tribunal convenes in 12 days. The prosecution will present the charges and the evidence, which is straightforward, because the facts are not in dispute. What is in dispute is the context. Why Mara did what she did, what led her to that point, and whether the systems that were supposed to prevent a situation like this bear any responsibility for its outcome. Do they? That is what I intend to demonstrate." She paused. "I need your testimony, Villy. Not just what happened during the match. I need your account of every interaction with Thesic, every denied complaint, every biased assignment. I need the tribunal to understand that what Mara did was not the beginning of this story. It was the end." I thought about that, the end. As if the weeks of targeted cruelty, the escalating abuse, the failed complaints, and the rigged match were chapters in a narrative that had been building toward a conclusion that nobody wanted, but everybody had made possible. Thesic had built the conditions. The Academy had maintained them. The oversight system had protected them. And Mara had walked into those conditions and done the only thing that her nature, her history, her entire evolutionary inheritance allowed her to do when someone she cared about was being destroyed in front of her. "I need to know," Lieutenant Dunning said, "whether you are willing to testify on Mara's behalf at the tribunal." I looked at her. My legs were still numb. My thorax still ached beneath the biocomposite patches. My career at the Academy was over. My government would recall me as a failed experiment. And the one person in the entire galaxy who had treated me as something more than a political gesture was sitting in a detention cell because she had refused to let the system's failure be my problem. "Tell me when and where," I said. "I will be there." The tribunal convened 3 weeks after the incident, in the main assembly hall of Station Korath 9. It was the largest enclosed space on the station, designed to hold full cohort ceremonies and senior command briefings, and on the day of the hearing, it was filled beyond its standard capacity. I entered in my mobility chair, guided by Prell, who had volunteered to accompany me as a medical attendant. The hall was arranged in a formal judicial configuration, with a raised bench for the 3-member tribunal panel at the front, prosecution and defense tables below, and tiered gallery seating for observers. Every seat was occupied. Recruits, instructors, station personnel, diplomatic representatives from at least 9 species delegations, and in the far corner, a cluster of recording equipment operated by galactic news services that had been filing requests for access since the story broke. A human tore the arm off a decorated Gorvon commander inside a military training academy. The story had spread across 12 systems in under a week. Opinion was divided sharply along species lines. The Gorvon Diplomatic Corps was demanding maximum punishment. Several smaller species delegations, including the Solani, had issued statements of cautious support. Earth's diplomatic service had deployed its most experienced military legal team and was treating the case as a matter of species-level precedent. Mara was brought in under guard. She wore standard detention clothing, plain gray, and her wrists were bound in front of her with restraints that seemed almost ornamental, given what the gallery knew she was capable of. She walked with a slight stiffness that I recognized as the lingering effect of her cracked ribs, but her posture was straight, and her expression was composed. She looked like someone attending an inconvenient appointment, rather than facing charges that could result in decades of imprisonment. She saw me as she was led to the defense table. Our eyes met across the hall, and she gave me a small nod, barely a movement, just a slight dip of her chin that carried more meaning than any formal gesture I had ever received from any diplomat or commander or government official in my entire life. It said, "I am still here. I would do it again." I nodded back. My throat was tight. The tribunal panel consisted of 3 senior officers from 3 different species. A Drael strategic commander named Kephis served as the presiding judge. A Kithari tactical officer named Vareen sat to his left. And on the right, in a decision that had generated significant debate during the panel selection process, a human rear admiral named Philip Grant, assigned to the station's Joint Operations Command, who had been deemed acceptable to both prosecution and defense as a species representative counterbalance. The charges were read: unauthorized removal of a tracking beacon, breach of a restricted zone, aggravated assault on a superior officer, willful maiming of a superior officer. Each charge was serious on its own. Together, they carried a combined maximum sentence of 40 years imprisonment and permanent exile from all galactic military institutions. The prosecution presented its case first. The prosecutor was a Gorvan legal officer named Thesser, who shared both species and, I suspected, sympathies with the injured commander. Thesser was methodical and effective. He presented the security footage. He presented the medical reports documenting Thesic's injuries, the separated limb, the tissue damage, the ongoing rehabilitation that the best Gorvan surgeons estimated would take years and might never fully restore function. He presented testimony from the security officers who had responded to the breach, describing what they found in Thesic's quarters and the trail of evidence leading to the medical bay. The facts were not in dispute. Mara had done what she had done. The footage was clear. The evidence was irrefutable. The prosecution rested with the confidence of a case built on undeniable physical reality. Then Lieutenant Dunning stood up. She was younger than I expected for a case of this magnitude, perhaps 30 standard years by human reckoning, with a calm, measured speaking style that reminded me of Mara herself. She wore the formal dress uniform of Earth's military legal corps, and she carried a datapad that she never once looked at during her presentation. She had memorized everything. "The defense does not dispute the events of that night," she began. "Recruit Voss entered Commander Thesic's quarters. She confronted him. A physical altercation occurred, and Commander Thesic sustained severe injuries. These facts are established, and we do not challenge them." The gallery murmured. Even the prosecution looked momentarily uncertain, as if they had expected a fight and instead received an open door. "What the defense does challenge," Dunning continued, "is the characterization of these events as an unprovoked assault. What the defense will demonstrate is that Recruit Voss acted after every legitimate institutional remedy was exhausted, that the injuries she sought to prevent and address were the direct result of deliberate command abuse, and that the system designed to protect recruits from exactly this type of abuse systematically failed at every level." She presented the evidence in sequence: the medical scans of my injuries, displayed on the hall's main screen in clinical detail that made several observers look away; the match recording, showing the size disparity, the pairing assignment, and the moment when I submitted, and Thesic did not signal the end. She played that moment 3 times, each time highlighting the timestamp, the clear submission gesture, and Thesic's crossed arms, his deliberate inaction. She presented the denied substitution request, showing that Mara had attempted to take my place in the match and been refused by Thesic's direct order. She presented the first complaint, dismissed. The second complaint, returned with a disciplinary note. The formal brutality report, forwarded back to Thesic himself for internal resolution. Recruit Voss attempted to use the system, Dunning said. 3 times, 3 separate filings through 3 separate channels. Each one was acknowledged, reviewed, and neutralized. The system did not fail through oversight. It failed through design. The complaint mechanism at this academy routes grievances against command officers back to those same command officers for resolution. It is not a safeguard. It is a circle. She let that hang in the air. Then she presented the piece of evidence that changed the temperature in the room. It was a compiled record, obtained through diplomatic channels by Earth's legal attaché, of 17 prior complaints filed against Commander Thesic during his tenure at the Academy. 17. Filed by recruits from 7 different species, over a period of 11 years. Every single one had been internally resolved. No formal investigation had ever been conducted. No disciplinary action had ever been taken. The gallery went silent. The tribunal panel members reviewed the document on their individual screens, and I watched Kephis, the Drael presiding judge, tapped through the pages with increasing speed, his segmented body clicking in the subsonic pattern that Drail use when they are processing information they find deeply troubling. Recruit Voss did not act in a vacuum, Dunning said. She acted in a system that had protected Commander Thesic from accountability for over a decade, a system that had allowed him to target vulnerable recruits without consequence, and that actively punished those who attempted to report his behavior. Under Earth's Unified Military Code, Article 7, Section 12, a service member has a duty to protect a fellow soldier when the chain of command has demonstrably failed to provide that protection. This is not a loophole, it is a foundational principle. When the system cannot protect, the soldier must. The Gorvan delegation erupted. 3 representatives stood simultaneously, objecting to the application of Earth's military code to a galactic institution. Presiding Judge Kefis restored order with a sharp click burst that overrode the hall's audio system, and the objection was noted, but overruled, on the grounds that species-specific legal frameworks were admissible as contextual reference during joint jurisdiction proceedings. Dunning called me as a witness. Prell wheeled my mobility chair to the testimony platform, and I faced the tribunal panel and the gallery and the recording equipment and the hundreds of eyes, biological and electronic, that were focused on me. My thorax ached. My legs were still numb below the knee. I was the smallest person in the room, and I was about to speak about the largest thing that had ever happened to me. The questions were straightforward. Dunning asked me to describe my experience at the academy, the escalating treatment from Thesic, the match against Dravok, the injuries I sustained, and the events in the medical bay afterward. I answered each question clearly and completely, in the simple, direct language that the Solani are trained to use in diplomatic proceedings. I did not exaggerate. I did not minimize. I told the truth, because the truth was sufficient. When the prosecution cross-examined me, Thesser asked whether I believed Mara's actions were justified. I thought about the question. I thought about the arm on the floor. I thought about Mara adjusting my blanket while covered in another person's blood. I thought about the 17 complaints that had been filed and buried over 11 years, the unknown number of recruits who had been injured or broken or sent home because the system that was supposed to protect them had decided that protecting them was less important than protecting the commander who was hurting them. I believe, I said, that every system Recruit Voss trusted to protect me chose not to. I believe she gave those systems every opportunity to work. I believe that when they failed, she made a decision that no one in this room can fully understand unless they have been the person lying on a medical bed, wondering if they will ever walk again, knowing that the person who put them there will face no consequences. I paused. The hall was silent. Was it justified? I do not know. I am not a legal scholar, but I know that I am alive, and I am healing, because someone in this galaxy decided that my safety was worth more than their career, their freedom, and their future. And I know that no system, no regulation, no chain of command did the same. The cross-examination ended. I was wheeled back to my position in the gallery. Commander Thesic testified via hololink from the medical facility where he was undergoing rehabilitation. His arm had been partially regenerated. The Gorvan's dense biology allowed for limited regrowth of severed limbs, but it remained non-functional, and the prognosis for full recovery was uncertain. He appeared on the screen in a medical gown, his right side diminished, the empty sleeve pinned neatly against his chest. Under questioning from Dunning, Thesic's composure began to fracture. She asked him about the match pairing. He called it unconventional, but within parameters. She asked him about the denied substitution. He cited regulation. She asked him about the moment when I submitted, and he did not signal the end of the match. He said he was assessing the situation. You were assessing the situation, Dunning repeated. For how many seconds? I do not recall precisely. The recording shows 14 seconds between the first submission signal and the end of the match. During those 14 seconds, Recruit Villy sustained a ruptured air sac and nerve damage that may be permanent. Were you assessing the situation for all 14 of those seconds, Commander? Thesic did not answer. Dunning asked about the 17 prior complaints. Thesic said he was not aware of the specific number. Dunning asked if he had been aware that complaints existed. He said training environments generate complaints, and that context matters. The context, Dunning said, is that 17 recruits from 7 species filed reports of abusive treatment under your command, and not a single investigation was conducted. Does that context satisfy you, Commander? The hololink flickered. Thesic's jaw was tight. He did not answer. The tribunal panel deliberated for 6 hours. The gallery remained seated. Nobody left. The air in the hall grew warm and stale, and still nobody moved, because everyone in that room understood that the verdict would echo far beyond Station Korath 9. It would set precedent. It would tell the galaxy what happened when a Deathworld human defended someone the system had abandoned. The panel returned. Presiding Judge Kefis read the verdict. On the charge of unauthorized removal of a tracking beacon, guilty. On the charge of breach of a restricted zone, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault on a superior officer, guilty with significant mitigating circumstances. On the charge of willful maiming of a superior officer, guilty with significant mitigating circumstances. The gallery held its breath. Sentence: time served and formal reprimand. No imprisonment, no exile, no discharge from military service. The tribunal noted, in its written decision, that systemic failures in the Academy's complaint resolution process had created conditions that provoked the incident, and that the defendant had demonstrated a pattern of exhausting legitimate remedies before resorting to direct action. The Gorvon delegation walked out. Their footsteps echoed through the hall like a statement of their own. In the weeks that followed, Commander Thesic was reassigned to an administrative posting on a station in a system so remote that the transfer was understood by everyone as a permanent exile wearing a different name. Recruit Dravok was expelled from the Academy for his role in the match, specifically for continuing to strike after a clear submission signal. Referee Voron was placed under review. The Academy's complaint resolution system was restructured by mandate of the Galactic Joint Operations Oversight Board, requiring all reports of command abuse to be investigated by independent panels, with no reporting relationship to the accused officer. The 17 prior complaints were reopened. Investigators were assigned. Former recruits from Thesic's earlier cohorts were contacted and interviewed. The process would take months, perhaps years. But the files were open. For the first time in over a decade, someone was looking. And Mara Voss walked out of detention with a formal reprimand on her record, and cracked ribs that were already healing, because humans heal from almost everything, given time. I found her on the observation deck on the evening of her release. It was a wide, curved platform on the station's outer ring, with transparent panels that looked out into the deep black. Stars scattered across the view like scattered light on dark water, and the distant nebulae painted soft colors at the edges of vision. It was the quietest place on the station, and Mara was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, looking out at all of it. I guided my mobility chair beside her and lowered the seat until we were at the same level. We sat together in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that does not need to be filled because it is already full. My nerve function is improving, I said eventually. Physician Tovis says the regeneration markers are positive. It will take time, but she believes I will walk normally again. Mara nodded. She did not smile, but something in her shoulders released, a tension I had not realized she was carrying, and she closed her eyes for a moment. Good, she said. That is good. My government has not recalled me, I continued. The Solani delegation submitted a statement during the tribunal. They formally thanked you for defending a citizen of the Republic. Mara opened her eyes. She looked at me with an expression that was difficult to read, even with all the practice I had accumulated. They thanked me? The exact words were, "The Solani Republic acknowledges and appreciates Recruit Voss's actions in defense of our citizen, undertaken when the Academy's own institutional protections proved insufficient." It was entered into the official record. Mara was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That is a very diplomatic way of saying, thank you for doing what we could not." "Yes," I said. "We are very good at diplomatic phrasing." She laughed. It was a short, quiet sound, nothing like the raw vocalization she had made during my match, but it carried its own weight. It was the sound of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally set it down, not because the weight was gone, but because she had carried it far enough. "Would you do it again?" I asked. Mara did not hesitate, every time. "Were you scared?" She paused. She looked out at the stars. and I watched her face in the reflected light, and I saw her thinking. Not calculating, not analyzing, just thinking, the way humans do when they are being honest with themselves about something that matters. "Not of him," she said. "I was scared I would not get to you fast enough during the match. I was standing in the gallery, watching Dravok hit you, and every second that passed was the longest second of my life. Everything after that was just follow-through." Follow-through? She reduced the most dramatic act of individual defiance in the recent history of the Galactic Joint Military Training Academy to follow-through, as if it were a natural consequence, a completed equation, a ball continuing to move after being thrown. And perhaps that was the truest description of what Mara Voss had done. She had not acted out of rage or vengeance or a desire for violence. She had acted because she had made a decision weeks earlier, standing in the mess hall with a ration bar in her hand, looking at a terrified Solani recruit who had no business being there and no one to look out for her. She had decided, in that moment, that I mattered, and everything that followed, the complaints, the reports, the tracking beacon, the locked door, the 90-second fight, the arm, was simply the completion of that decision. Follow-through. The galaxy categorizes Earth as a death world because of its gravity, its predators, its earthquakes and hurricanes, and volcanic eruptions, and the 1,000 other ways that planet tries to kill everything living on it. The classification is based on physical danger, on the measurable risks that a world presents to biological organisms attempting to survive on its surface. But that classification misses the point. What makes humans dangerous is not their planet. It is not their gravity-dense bones or their persistence hunting endurance, or their ability to metabolize toxins that would kill most galactic species. What makes humans dangerous is that they love, with the same intensity that their planet tried to kill them. They bond with the same ferocity that they evolved to fight. And once that bond is established, once a human has looked at another being and decided that this one is mine, the death world does not just show up in their muscles and their reflexes and their capacity to absorb punishment. It shows up in their decisions. It shows up in their willingness to walk into a room with something 3 times their size and 200 times their rank and take from it the piece that did the harm. Because the alternative, where they do nothing and let the system grind down the person they care about, is not an alternative at all. It is not even thinkable. They asked me at the tribunal hearing if I feared Mara Voss. I said no. They asked me if I thought she was dangerous. I said yes. To anyone who earns it. Then they asked what she was to me, and I told them the most terrifying word in any human language. Friend.